Hello and welcome back to another daily cribbage. Let's take it slow. I've been away for the last week and I need a bit of time to sort of get back into the swing of things again. I have been playing a lot before, maybe around 2 weeks ago. So I need some time to get back into it. Let's take things one step at a time. We've got what seems like a pretty easy discard here. We've got ace 4, 5, king. The 7, 9 doesn't really combo with anything, so we'll start by throwing that away. 6 is one of the best things that we can hit, and our opponent leads a 3. So we have some interesting options here, because when your opponent leads a 3, it does often indicate that they have a 2 in the back, so that whenever we play a 10, so if we play our king here, we can expect our opponent to have the 2. So there's a few things we can do about this. One is to invite maximum chaos. What is maximum chaos here? It's to sort of signal to our opponent that they better have a lot of low cards, otherwise we're going to get a lot of points out of sequences of runs. And so that means that either playing the ace or the 4, with the idea that if our opponent plays a 2, we can continue the run after that. So say we play the ace, our opponent fills in the gap with their 2, get 3 points for the run, and we can play our 4 to get 4 points for the run, which would be overall an extra point for us. And similarly with the 4, if our opponent plays a 2, then we can play our 5 or ace and get 4 points for that run. The only problem with the 4 is if our opponent plays a 5, then they get 3 points for the run, and we'll have to settle for pairing their 5 instead of extending the run even further. The other option is we could play our 5, and if our opponent fills in the run with their 4, we get to pair the 4, which is pretty similar to the line where we go 4 and then pair our opponent's 5. So we have to sort of weigh up whether we want to go into these complications, or do we want to chill out, just allow our opponent to get their 2 points for the king, and we go from there. Well, one thing that tells us whether or not we want to invite chaos is the position. Position is clearly 0-0, nothing's happened. And so if we play things out as they are, let's say that we both get a couple of points on this play, our hand is currently worth, and this is where my sort of lack of playing sort of slows me down a bit. To count this hand, I've got 5 points for the 4, 5, 6, 7 for that 15, 9 for that 15. So 9 points in hand, which is pretty good. That's pretty average, but average is quite good because you expect to undershoot your average. And in our crib, we've got 6, 7, 9 that we know about, so something big could be there, something like an 8. That would be pretty nice. We don't expect our opponents to throw away 5s into the crib, but yeah, there's at least 2 points there. So we're fairly happy. If our opponent has 4 points in hand with like 2, 3, 10, 10, or 6 points, then our opponent's not looking too good, so it's okay to give them an extra 2 points here. So I'm leaning more towards the king, but I think that any card is fine here. The problem with playing the 4 is if our opponent plays a 5 or an 8, which can be sort of very natural hands, and of course it's very hard to just narrow in on your opponent's hand when they lead a 3, because 3 is very common lead. But one thing we could maybe have quite often is our opponent might have another 3. So if we kept our 4 and 5 for later, maybe we could get a run off that. So let's play the king. Okay, so opponent doesn't have any 2s, which is interesting. Opponent showing us 3, 10 offsuit. What does this mean? Does that mean that our opponent has 3, 4, 5 maybe? It might mean 3, 4, 5. So anything else it could mean? It could mean that the 3 is just a rogue card and our opponent has like 5, 10, 10 in the back. Although I tend to like the option of playing the 5 to make this total 18 instead of playing the 10. 3, 3, 5, 5. Anyway, I think that it might take me a while to sort of get a good idea of our opponent's range. So let's say that we're playing against 3, 4, 5. That means we shouldn't play our 4 here. That's quite dangerous. And playing our 5 is also dangerous because our opponent led a 3, so it's quite likely that they have another 3 in the back. So I think ace is a fairly reasonable play. Our opponent could have ace, ace in the back. 3, ace, ace with a 10. That's a hand that makes sense, but that's very specific, and we hold an ace, and our opponent would really need 2 aces for this to make sense, and they don't have a 2, so they don't have ace, 2, 3, so I'll just play this. Yeah, opponent has another 3, and we get 31 out of this. Final card is a 10. Okay, so they had double 3, double 10, which is not something you often get too much value out of, but by steering clear of a lot of the most natural hands our opponent could have, we managed to actually get a few points on the play, which is nice. So off to an early lead. What have we got now? Okay, 2 through 5 and Jack King. A couple of options sort of stand out to me. The first is, whenever you have a long run, you have to think about what happens if you just keep that long run. Well, we have to throw away our jack, which we're never too happy to do. Jack, king, 2 10s can sort of be a pretty safe discard. If our opponent misses queens, then we're usually pretty good there. But if our opponent does have a queen in the crib somehow, we are going to suffer. Instead, so my natural reaction for this one would be to keep the jack, keep the 5, maybe just throw away 2 king. 2 king is fairly far apart. We block a 3, so that's nice. And yeah, we keep 5 points, and often it turns into 6 with a lot of top cards. In fact, it's very hard not to improve with a top card. I think 9s are maybe one of the only exception. The other thing about keeping 2 to 5 is that not only are we making ourselves available for double runs on any 2 through 5, 2 through 5 improves on a lot of top cards. Think about cutting any 10. You improve to 8 points immediately. Think about cutting an ace. You might think, oh, that only increases the run by 1, but ace to 5 adds to 15, so that's 7 points, which is quite nice. Similarly with the 6, we get 4, 5, 6. And we also get 2, 3, 4, 6. That's 15s, so that would be 9 points as well. I guess maybe the 7. 7 is a little disappointing. 8s are okay. That's still 10. That's still 8 points. 9s are a little disappointing. I'm sort of talking myself into keeping 2 to 5, discarding the Jack King. But I just want to avoid the variance in the crib, I think. And this 3 to 5 plus Jack is still going to improve on most cuts. 6 is lovely. And we could lead our 4 because it keeps our hand still spread out. So we will have options in the future of how to play this. We could lead the Jack. If our opponent plays 5, we can pair the 5. And is the 3 lead an option? Of course. Threes are also really fine to lead. I think I'm going to go with the 4, and if our opponent makes it 14, I'm going to play out the 5 and hopefully offload my 5 that way. So if our opponent pairs this, then I'm not too happy. We get a 15, I'll take that, and on pretty much anything here I'm playing out my 5. Maybe the only thing I'm not playing my 5 out on is if our opponent plays an ace, maybe. Okay, opponent showing us 8-9 with the 6 on top, could be quite scary. Opponent showing us 6 points so far. Is it a 7? No, it's just an 8, so only 8 points. It could have been a lot worse for us. And in the crib, 0 is pretty nice. Let's just have a look at the difference then between 2 king and jack king. As you can see, 2 through 5 does have a slightly bigger average hand, but you just forfeit slightly more in the crib. Now, the crib column is just an average. We don't get to see the standard deviations here. We don't get to see the variance. And I think that the variance for jack king is a little bit higher than for 2 king. So, a lot of the time our opponents don't get much out of us discarding the jack king, but you can see immediately that if our opponent throws away jack queen or queen king, and these are things that the dealer does discard, we've paid them off in a big way. And then in third place there's this 2 jack, but 2 jack is strictly worse than 2 king because the jack is just worth more points. And then after that, 4 king, 2, 3, 5 jack is something that you can think about keeping. It's a very consistent number of points, and it plays very straightforward as pawn. You get to lead your 3 or your 2 and try and make 15. Very common hand, and in this case we just have a little bit better. Let's continue. Okay, lots of jacks, lots of kings. Let's try and hit a queen. Let's do it. That's not a queen. We can play out a jack, we can play out a king. It'll probably be a heart because we want to play the flush, or we want to fake the flush. And our opponent probably has slightly more jacks than kings. So I will play out my king first, and then I'll play out my jack. I'm paying attention to what my opponent has. 3, 5, 7, probably has 4s and 6s in the back. Doesn't really interact with my king or jack, so they have 10 points, which is pretty good. 4 points in hand, 4 points in crib, all pretty normal. So currently at 39, our opponent's on 24, lacking a lot of points. This one, real standard, keep the double 5, keep the double 10, 10 points guaranteed, sometimes 11. And at this point, there's an important fork in the road. We can either play out the jack and hope that our opponent doesn't have an ace, and I think that against human opponents, they have an ace a lot of the time here. Maybe an unbalanced number of aces, so we have to be careful. Against the computer, I think the computer is just playing the king here because they're behind and they want to just score as many points immediately as possible, and they haven't really kept an ace that much. So what am I talking about here? This is the debate between playing a 5 here and playing out a jack. If we play out the jack, then we're mostly worried about our opponent playing an ace, not because our opponent gets an extra point. That's not what we're worried about at all. We're mostly worried about us having to lead the 5 next time. So we have an option, which is we can play out our 5 now, and if our opponent just has a whole hand of 10s, then we get to pair our own 5 and keep the jack for later, which might very well fall into a trap because the jack is one of the most common cards that we have here. The other option is that we can try and high roll, play out our jack first. If our opponent passes, then hopefully we get to play out a 5 on our opponent's 10. Sometimes even getting a triple 5, but I don't think that happens very often. So I don't think that actually you can fear the ace too much, thinking about it a little bit more. I think we just play out the jack here. We keep our double 5. I know it plays terribly, but okay. I guess the other option is our opponent trapping double 5. If they have a 6 here, or sorry, if they have another 4 here, that would have been very sad. Okay. In this case, if we had played out the 5 first, it would have given us some extra options later on, but we don't actually miss out on too many points there. Okay, so 50 plays 38. We have shot past the milestone with great force, and our opponent is struggling to catch up. There's a nice natural flush in our hand, nothing better than this really. If we were really desperate, then maybe there's an argument about trying to hit the double run with the 8 double 9 10 or double 9 10 jack, but it's just not necessary here. This is 8 points and it improves with I want to say most cuts. 3 is very reasonable considering we threw away 3-9. Although our opponent leads a 2, so the 3 on top is a little bit scary. Quite like our opponent to have something that's not a hand that's got 12 points here or worse. So I'm going to play out the 9 here. Our opponent plays an 8, which is a pretty big tell, because, you know, it opens us up to being able to get a run. And we are going to play this 10. We're going to play it fairly quickly, but if your opponent is forced to play such a card which is really putting them in an awkward situation, it really usually indicates that your opponent's hand is... it usually tells you what your opponent's hand is. We could probably work it out right here. What kind of hands would our opponent do this with? Well, clearly they would have to do this if they had the rest of their hand be 8s. Probably without the 8 of diamonds, because you'd want to fake the flush. So that's a very specific hand, but, you know, 2 8s is very likely. Opponent could have a 7 as well. They could have maybe double 8 7 in the back, because if our opponent plays a 7, then they might be worried about us pairing it. But let's see. 8-2, in a vacuum, if our opponent shows us 8-2 in their hand, we're thinking opponent has 5s, but I'm thinking about... I think that happens less here, because our opponent should have probably played the 5. Opponent shows us jack, which also makes sense because our opponent didn't want to make the total 21. The opponent could have 2 jacks. Opponent could have 5. I think taking the 2 points here is fine, but we should expect our opponent to play a 5 on top of us quite often, because opponent shown us 2 8s, so expect a 5 here. Opponent showed us 7, so they weren't sitting on a very good hand at all, just 7 8s, and then they managed to get an extra 2 points by cutting the 3. Okay, 4 points in the crib for us, pretty nice. Our opponent says it's all okay. Keeping the 5 with the double jack is good. Unfortunately, we have to split up our pair of 2s, and we should do that by offsuiting into the crib. And we also get to keep a few hearts for faking the flush if we need it. We probably have to play a jack out here. Leading a 2 sort of handcuffs us with the values that we have left, so start off with a jack. 11, making the total 11 is usually a good strategy. It means that we get to play out our 5 though, because if our opponent pairs our 5, then we get to play 31. And curious what our opponent has. Do they just have 4 aces, or they have nothing better than an ace? Often the best way to work out your opponent's hand is to assume that your opponent is playing the most optimal card from their hand that they could do. And so this allows you to start ruling out cards that your opponent could have in their hand. So for instance, in this situation when the total is 16, maybe you would quite happily play a 9, taking the total to 25. Or maybe you would happily make the total 24 by playing out an 8. These kinds of things might be a little bit better than an ace, potentially. You might also like playing a 2 as well, or a 3, with the idea that if you had a hand that could make a long run, if you're, I know, something like if you had ace 2, 3, 4, then if we could be playing into some of these traps. But that's getting ahead of myself a little bit. I do sort of expect my opponent to have 4s and 10s here. Ace, ace, 4, 10 makes sense. So if I play a jack right now, I'm playing into that, but I don't really like playing a 2 here and possibly getting trapped into my opponent playing out a long run if their last 2 cards are 3 and 4, because I wouldn't be able to get rid of my jack in that case. So ace, ace, 3 often has a 10, but 2s, our opponent does have all the 2s here. But it's just 3 ace, ace, queen for 6 points. So we're still looking really good. Six, 8, double 9, 10, queen. And we also have a flush in hand. So if we throw away 8, 9 here, we keep ourselves 6 points. 6, double 9 is worth 6 points as well. But then we have to break up our double run. And I have no intention of doing that, because the reason why you like keeping double runs is they're worth a lot of points and they still keep improving. 8s, 9s, 10s are really great. Here I have no ambition to get into these complications because I don't have a 6 or anything low. If I play the 8 here and an opponent has 9 and 6 left in the back, our opponent could easily just get 7 points on the play. So I'm just going to play out a 10, avoid complications, and opponent doesn't have 777, which is good, and they had to say go on 24, which means that the rest of their hand is worth 9 or more, and so we have a really great opportunity to maybe triple up on this 9. Opponent doesn't have that. They have 7-7 jack, and I assume their last card is an 8. That would make sense of the double 7s. Nope, just double 7, double jack. So not as many points, and opponent's really struggling. I think that this game is basically over at this point. It's just a matter of tying it up. So we can either throw away ace 3 or ace 7. Ace 3 is not as safe because our opponent could throw away 2s. And also, we block the 7-7 ace in the crib because we hold an ace. So this is great for us. Ace comes up on top, naturally. And we get to lead our 3. We have 2 3s here. And why not get a couple of points? Opponent wants to enter into complications. I say no. If we had played a 5 there, our opponent could play 4s for the run. So let's avoid that. And we get 6 points, and our opponent's still again only on 4 points there, 2 points in the crib. Yeah, this is an absolute massacre. Okay, 2-2-3. We love to keep that together, and we get to throw away 5-7 or 5 king. 5-7 scores a little bit more. Well, in the crib, 5 king is an immediate 2 points, but considering the points in hand as well, 5-7 is the choice. 10 on top is really great, and opponent has a lot of extra aces and a lot of 4s here. So, but they don't have many 2s. So I'm going to play out a 3 here. Don't really fear the 2s. Ace 8. Our opponent is telling us that they have 6s and potentially some 7s in hand. So why don't we, well, we could make the total 22, and if our opponent has a 7, we can play out a 2. But our opponent wouldn't usually play a 7 there, but let's see if they do. They just play out another ace, 8, double ace, double 8. Opponent is having all of the, opponent's had all the hands that have these 2 pairs, which 2 pair is a good hand in poker, but not so good usually in cribbage. Up to 117, opponent is thinking about, I guess, all the things that went wrong. And we only need 4 points here. Only 4 points are necessary. And there are many ways for us to keep it. So why don't we just throw away 8-2, something like this, or we could throw away 3-7, pretty safe. I think I like throwing away the 3-7, or we could throw away 3-jack as well. Maybe 3-jack. So the point is that I want to lead a 7 or an 8, and I get to capitalize if my opponent plays the other one for 15. Yeah, so here I'm going to lead the 7, and okay, I'm not sure what that means. Okay, so they have 4-5, and maybe it's game over. Yep, we get the go, and we get all the points. Let's have a little recap of what happened here. We managed to score crazy good on the play, the hand, the crib. This was a real massacre. So this was me getting back into the swing of things, and I hope you enjoyed the analysis and the thoughts along the way. I'll be bringing you a few more games this week, and until then, bye for now.